Well, hello again. I'm Dawn Eden Goldstein. I have a doctorate in sacred theology. I did my doctoral research on Catholic teaching on the redemptive value of suffering. So I'm delighted to be back with you today in episode 6 of this reading course on Pope St. John Paul II's apostolic letter Salvifici Doloris on the Christian meaning of human suffering. And as always, if you're missing any episodes, you can find them on my blog, The Dawn Patrol, which is at dawneden.blogspot.com. That's Dawn Eden, DAWNEDEN .blogspot.com. And you can also find me on Twitter at Dawn of Mercy. In episode 5, we read through section 8 of Salvifici Doloris. So let's begin then with section 9. So here we begin part 3 of the apostolic letter. This section is on the quest for an answer to the question of the meaning of suffering. So John Paul writes, "Within each form of suffering endured by man, and at the same time at the basis of the whole world of suffering," remember he's speaking about suffering as being like a universe unto itself, because he's interested both in the objective aspect of suffering as it's seen from the outside, and suffering as it's experienced from the inside. As we discussed earlier, John Paul's as in his philosophical background, he's a phenomenologist, meaning that he's interested in that area of philosophy having to do with human experience. So he says, within each form of suffering endured by man, and at the same time at the basis of the whole world of suffering, there inevitably arises the question, why? It is a question about the cause, the reason, and equally about the purpose of suffering, and, in brief, a question about its meaning. Not only does it accompany human suffering, but it seems even to determine its human content, what makes suffering precisely human suffering. And this is, again, John Paul speaking as a phenomenologist, interested in human experience. And it has to do also with John Paul's interest in theological anthropology, meaning the theology of what it means to be a human being. He says, "It is obvious that pain, especially physical pain, is widespread in the animal world, but only the suffering human being knows that he is suffering and wonders why, and he suffers in a humanly speaking, still deeper way if he does not find a satisfactory answer." So we touched on this in an earlier episode when John Paul is thinking of animal suffering. Here, when he's reflecting upon it, in the background, we can see John Henry Newman's, now St. John Henry Cardinal Newman's discourse on the mental sufferings of our Lord in his Passion, where Newman also reflects on animal suffering. John Henry Newman here is speaking about how it's that brute animals would seem to feel so little pain because they have not the power of reflection or of consciousness. Now, as Father John Carci, the rector of Mundelein Seminary, would say, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that brute animals don't feel any pain. Newman's not saying that. Certainly John Paul's not saying that. They do feel pain. But animals don't feel pain to the extent that human beings do, in the sense that whereas they have sensation, certainly if an animal's injured, it will have the sensation of pain as human beings do. Animals can't reflect back on the injury. If I were to harm my hand, so that I lost the power of for a while being able to use my right hand, and my hand were in pain, I wouldn't just have the physical pain of my right hand being in pain. I would have the great sorrow, the interior sorrow of not being able to lose, or not being able to use my hand properly. By the way, I think this is showing to you as my left hand. It's actually my right. The image may be reversed on your side. Anyway, so yeah, for a human being, we can reflect on it. There's that. There's that song. Actually, there are a number of songs that speak about this. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. If I were to, God forbid, lose use even for a short time of my right hand, I'm a righty. I would be thinking about all the things that I could be doing if I were using my hand, and how happy I was when I could have used it. And moreover, even in feeling the sensation of my injured hand, I wouldn't just be thinking, wow, that hurts right now. I would be thinking, that hurt 5 minutes ago, it hurt this morning, it hurt yesterday, and the life of my hand is just a continuous, stream or arc of pain. That's the power of reflection, and that's what animals don't have. They have the sensation of pain, they don't have the reflection. So that's this point from Newman that John Paul's touching on. And some of you may know this same point or similar point also from C.S. Lewis. Now we're in a possibly illegal, I don't know, online version of C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain, where he's speaking about animal suffering. And basically, Lewis is considering this whole aspect of animal pain, animals also not having the ability to reflect on their pain, so that they, have a kind of a succession of one, a perception of the succession of one pain following upon another pain. C.S. Lewis is saying here in The Problem of Pain that animals don't have that perception of succession in the same way as human beings do. Maybe some animals have a kind of reflection, but nothing on the level of human beings. I don't think that C.S. Lewis actually credits Newman in here, and he should, but I think that Newman's observation, Newman coming quite a bit before Lewis, maybe about 100 years before Lewis, Newman is in the background with C.S. Lewis, just as Newman is in the background with John Paul here. So returning to John Paul, John Paul, just to repeat that last sentence, only the suffering human being knows that he is suffering and wonders why, and he suffers in a humanly speaking, still deeper way if he does not find a satisfactory answer. So John Paul goes on, this is a difficult question, just as is a question closely akin to it, the question of evil. Why does evil exist? Why is there evil in the world? When we put the question in this way, we are always, at least to a certain extent, asking a question about suffering too. So this is important. The theology of asking why is there evil is known as theodicy. I suppose theodicy also refers, if you take the literal meaning of it, it refers to other questions being asked of God. But the number one question asked of God is, why would a good God permit evil, or how can evil exist under a good God? So John Paul goes on with regard to the question of why is there evil and why is there suffering. Both questions are difficult when an individual puts them to another individual, when people put them to other people, as also when man puts them to God. For man does not put this question to the world, even though it is from the world that suffering often comes to him, but he puts it to God as the creator and Lord of the world. And it is well known that concerning this question, there not only arise many frustrations and conflicts in the relations of man with God, but it also happens that people reach the point of actually denying God. I just keep reading further for a bit before commenting, because this is pretty self-explanatory. For whereas the existence of the world opens, as it were, the eyes of the human soul to the existence of God, I think you'll find that in Romans 1:17 to 18, let's just look at Romans 1:17, 1:18. Let's see. You can see I've been looking how to make roasted Brussels sprouts with garlic in this pandemic time. All right, so Romans 1:17 to 18. Oh, well, that doesn't seem to be what I thought it would be there, but I'm going to give it a look anyway. And yep, here it is. Yes. So actually that's 1:18. Let me just push this back a bit. Here we go. So yes. So Romans 18. It wasn't quite where I thought it would be, but close enough. So this is chapter 1 of Romans, where it says, "The wrath of God is indeed being revealed from heaven against every impiety and wickedness of those who suppress the truth by their wickedness. For what can be known about God is evident to them, because God made it evident to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes of eternal power and divinity have been able to be understood and perceived in what he has made." So going back to John Paul, says that the existence of the world opens, as it were, the eyes of the human soul to the existence of God. So basically, if our reason is operating in the right way, and this is the point of St. Paul in his letter to the Romans, simply on a philosophical level, we see there's creation, there's got to be a creator. This doesn't tell us that there's a creator who's a trinity. It doesn't tell us everything about God just looking at creation, but it tells us that God exists, just by the fact that creation exists. So just to finish this sentence for John Paul's here, for whereas the existence of the world opens, as it were, the eyes of the human soul to the existence of God, to his wisdom, power, and greatness, evil and suffering seem to obscure this image, sometimes in a radical way, especially in the daily drama of so many cases of undeserved suffering and of so many faults without proper punishment. So this circumstance shows, perhaps more than any other, the importance of the question of the meaning of suffering. It also shows how much care must be taken both in dealing with the question itself and with all possible answers to it. I'm going to keep reading further here before commenting. Man can put this question to God with all the emotion of his heart and with his mind full of dismay and anxiety, and God expects the question and listens to it, as we see in the revelation of the Old Testament. In the book of Job, the question has found its most vivid expression. I remember we were speaking in an earlier episode about the distinction with respect to that even though, as John Paul points out, the Hebrew language doesn't distinguish between the word evil and the word suffering. At least the Hebrew of the Old Testament doesn't distinguish in the way that the Greek of the New Testament does. Still, in the book of Job, it is clear that Job suffers innocently. So reading on in John Paul's words, okay. The story of this just man, Job, who, without any fault of his own, is tried by innumerable sufferings, is well known. He loses his possessions, his sons and daughters, and finally he himself is afflicted by a grave sickness. In this horrible situation, 3 old acquaintances come to his house, and each one, in his own way, tries to convince him that since he has been struck down by such varied and terrible sufferings, he must have done something seriously wrong. So this is Job's would-be comforters. They're trying to comfort him by telling him, like, this stinks, but it can't be due to God. Therefore, it's your fault personally. That's how the comforters are trying to deal with this problem of suffering, thinking that if Job suffered, they're assuming that he can't actually be innocent, even though the book of Job tells us right at the beginning that Job is a just man. So just for an illustration here, hopefully the picture will come up that I want to come up. Yes. So this is William Blake from William Blake's illustrated book of Job. I forget the exact title of it, but if you search online for William Blake Job, you can find all these images on Wikipedia. They're beautiful. This version is from the Morgan Library. Each one is different because it's hand-drawn, but you see that Blake has so beautifully filled in the plague that Job is suffering from, and his eyes running with tears, and these would-be comforters all just hiding their faces from him, even as they try to comfort him. John Paul goes on, for suffering, they say, meaning Job's would-be comforters, they say, always strikes a man as a punishment for a crime. It is sent by the absolutely just God and finds its reason in the order of justice. This is the claim of Job's comforters. It can be said that Job's old friends wish not only to convince him of the moral justice of the evil, but in a certain sense, they attempt to justify to themselves the moral meaning of suffering. In their eyes, suffering can have a meaning only as a punishment for sin, therefore only on the level of God's justice, who repays good with good and evil with evil. This, unfortunately, is a problem that we now are seeing with the pandemic, just as with Hurricane Katrina. If I remember correctly, Jimmy Swaggart, I ask your forgiveness if I'm getting the name wrong, it was someone else, but I think it was Jimmy Swaggart, and certainly some other preachers were claiming that Katrina was God's wrath against sinful New Orleans and all that awful stuff. That's a spiritually immature way of looking at certain kinds of sufferings, and it's certainly not how we want to look at the pandemic. Now, I will grant that earlier, John Paul does say that the 20th century brought an accumulation of sufferings as though in proportion to the mistakes and transgressions of our contemporary civilization. So we can, in a certain way, in a certain sense, examine whether if we live in an evil time, if there's a lot of evil, Could, the evils that we're suffering now be some kind of call to God for interior reflection? And in fact, Pope Francis said something like that in his Urbi et Orbi message, where he spoke of this time as a time for reflection. I'll try to find that exact link, and I'll also put it, Pope Francis, Urbi et Orbi, full text. Here we go. So I'll link to this later. But Pope Francis speaks about how this is a time when God is calling us to be converted. You are calling on us to seize this time of trial as a time of choosing. It is not the time of your judgment, but of our judgment, a time to choose what matters and what passes away, a time to separate what is necessary from what is not. So that's Pope Francis's reflection, and I would say that that's something that John is very much in line with what John Paul is saying here, because even when John Paul speaks about a level of suffering in the 20th century that is almost or as though in proportion to the evils of that century, the main point is that John Paul is very careful not to connect, A to A and B to B, and to say, well, we did this sin in the 20th century, therefore we're suffering this. And we did that sin in the 20th century, and therefore we're suffering that. Likewise, Pope Francis doesn't do that either, because to do such a thing creates an immature image of God as just this wrathful, angry, mythical deity just hurling spears where he doesn't like someone. And that's not our God. It's not the Christian God. It's also not the true God of the Old Testament, as we'll see as John Paul delves into the true message of Job. So let's read further in John Paul. The point of reference in this case is the doctrine expressed in other Old Testament writings, which show us suffering as punishment inflicted by God for human sins. The God of Revelation is the lawgiver and judge to a degree that no temporal authority can see. So it is true that in the book of Exodus, for example, and elsewhere in the books of Moses, when we read about the journey of the Jewish people to the promised land, we see times when people are backbiting and complaining against God, and God inflicts them with a plague. So those are teaching moments by God, but that those moments we can't extend them to every illness. And in fact, God is quite explicit about what is inflicted as punishment and what is not, as we saw in John, let's say John 9. I remember I was looking at this last time, John 9, NABRE. So yes, John 9, the man born blind. We looked at this earlier, where we see as Jesus, passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him." So in the Bible, God is quite explicit that although some of the punishments in the Old Testament were due to in proportion to a particular evil. Not every evil that befalls us is meant as a punishment for sin, and we ourselves are not the ones who label punishments as being for sin. Only God in Revelation can do that, and revelation of that particular type, attributing words to God, ended with the death of the last apostle, public revelation. So John Paul goes on. The God of Revelation is the lawgiver and judge to a degree that no temporal authority can see. For the God of Revelation is first of all the Creator, from whom comes together with existence the essential good of creation. Therefore, the conscious and free violation of this good by man is not only a transgression of the law, but at the same time an offense against the Creator, who is the first lawgiver. Such a transgression has the character of sin according to the exact meaning of this word, namely the biblical and theological one. Corresponding to the moral evil of sin is punishment, which guarantees the moral order in the same transcendent sense in which this order is laid down by the will of the Creator and supreme lawgiver. John Paul's making a complex point here, so I'm going to read further before commenting on it, because I want to make sure I get the whole point. From this, there also derives one of the fundamental truths of religious faith, equally based upon revelation, namely that God is a just judge who rewards good and punishes evil. For thou art just in all that thou hast done to us. Remember what I said about how the Vatican is not quite just in putting bold where bold type is not in the original. But we go on. For thou art just in all that thou hast done to us, and all thy works are true, and thy ways right, and all thy judgments are truth. Thou hast executed true judgments in all that thou hast brought upon us. For in truth and justice thou hast brought all this upon us because of our sins. So that's a scriptural quote, footnote. I'm not going to look down for the source of that right now. But basically, what John's saying is that what John Paul is saying is that Job's friends have part of the truth. They have the part of the truth that is that God is the lawgiver, is the judge. But as John Paul is going to explain, Job's comforters don't have the entire truth. So John Paul goes on, the opinion expressed by Job's friends manifests a conviction also found in the moral conscience of humanity. The objective moral order demands punishment for transgression, sin, and crime. So this is a truth written into us through natural law. The sense that when something evil happens, there's a crack in the world that needs to be repaired. Any kind of evil in the world is a lack that needs to be supplied. It's a wrong that needs to be righted. This is one of the deepest understandings that we feel as created beings, even before we have explicit knowledge of revelation. So John Paul goes on, from this point of view, suffering appears as a justified evil. The conviction of those who explain suffering as a punishment for sin finds support in the order of justice, and this corresponds to the conviction expressed by one of Job's friends, as I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So you reap what you sow. And again, this is part of the truth, but it's not the entire truth. It's not the entire truth of the Old Testament. It's not the entire truth that we have revealed in Christ. So moving on to section 11, we're not going to get through this whole section this time, but we should begin. Job, however, challenges the truth of the principle that identifies suffering with punishment for sin. And he does this on the basis of his own opinion, for he is aware that he has not deserved such punishment. And in fact, he speaks of the good that he has done during his life. So this is a very human thing. As the Pet Shop Boys with Dusty Springfield sang, "What have I done to deserve this?" In the end, God himself reproves Job's friends for their accusations and recognizes that Job is not guilty. His suffering is the suffering of someone who is innocent, and it must be accepted as a mystery which the individual is unable to penetrate completely by his own intelligence. So this is the main point here, that God is showing suffering as something that the human mind cannot rationally say, I did X, therefore I'm suffering Y, or I'm suffering Y, it must be because I did X. We can't create on our own a one-to-one relationship. There is a mystery beyond us in the mind of God, in divine providence, that is the mystery of God's own knowledge of suffering and its meaning. But as we'll see as we read further into Salvifici Doloris, God doesn't leave this mystery completely veiled to us. God unveils the mystery, not to sound too much like Christopher West here, but he does unveil it in Christ. He doesn't unveil it in an answer that is can be expressed in its entirety in words. Mysteries are beyond words. But he does tell us something about it, and some of that which we're told is in words, but much of it is simply in, let's see if I have one here. This is a rosary that was blessed by Archbishop Sheen. So God doesn't just reveal the answer to the mystery in words. He reveals it in the cross, in the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And in what follows, in this apostolic letter, we're going to read some very beautiful, and for me personally, very helpful reflections from John Paul on how Jesus Christ, through his Paschal mystery, reveals to us the Christian meaning of human suffering. So I hope you'll stay tuned for the next episode, trying to do 5 episodes a week. I'm a little behind this week due to bandwidth issues, but hopefully get 2 more episodes up within the next couple of days. And also, please do comment on social media. Please share these with your friends. If you're benefiting from this at all, if you think that others would benefit, because I am enjoying this, but I need to know that people are watching, because it's most enjoyable to me if I know that it's reaching people and that it's helping them. So thanks very much to those of you who have commented on YouTube. The comments are held for moderation, but I do eventually approve all relevant comments, or comment on social media if you can. Thank you so much. Please pray for me. I pray for all of you who are watching this, and commend you all to the Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary. God bless you. See you next time.